Hello, and welcome to today's Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center and Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety Pedestrian Safety Action Plan webinar series. Today is the fourth webinar of this 7-part series. Today's webinar is entitled Pedestrian Safety Education with Nancy Pullen-Seufert, Associate Director of the National Center for Safe Routes to School. My name is David Anderson, and I'm the PBIC Communications Coordinator. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. I'd first like to say hello to today's speaker to make sure she is ready and everyone can hear her. Nancy, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Attendees, if you can hear me and if you can hear Nancy, click the hand in the box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to raise your hand so we can be sure our audience can hear us. Alrighty, great. It looks like hands are being raised, so we'll go ahead and move forward. Before we get started with today's webinar, I want to go over a few administrative details and the functionality of the webinar software. If for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar, please reload the website and log back into the program. You'll be able to rejoin the session. Please note attendees will not be able to speak during the webinar. We do expect a large number of attendees on this call, so by muting your audio, it helps us to cut down on confusion and background noise. As an attendee, you have a control box in the upper right corner of your screen that collapses and expands by clicking the double arrows. Though you won't be able to speak, you will have the ability to ask questions by entering them in the question box. If you have a problem during the webinar, you may enter it here. I'll monitor these questions and respond to you if I'm able. Questions pertaining to the presentation may be asked at any time in the question box, but will not be addressed until the end of the program, when we have built in about 20 minutes for a discussion period. Please feel free to ask those questions as we go along, and we'll get to them after the presentation. Also, when you exit the webinar, there's a very brief survey that will pop up. We would very much appreciate your feedback on our performance today. Following today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email. This email will be sent 1 to 2 days after the presentation and will include a link to download a printable certificate of attendance for 1.5 hours of instruction. If there are multiple attendees at your site, please forward this link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate with their name. This webinar has been approved by AICP for 1.5 CM credits. The Road Safety Academy, the training and education arm of the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, is a registered provider of CM credits. For more information on the Road Safety Academy, please visit www.rsa.unc.edu. Before we get started with today's program, I want to give everyone a little information about this webinar series. The goal of the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan webinar series is intended to help communities address pedestrian safety issues and initiate the steps to drafting a tailored pedestrian safety action plan. Modeled after the Federal Highway Administration and PBIC's in-person training course, How to Develop a Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, this free webinar series will cover topics ranging from funding to safety enforcement. The next webinar in the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan series is scheduled for Thursday, June 16, 2011 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar is entitled Safety Enforcement and will be presented by Peter Fluke, President of We Bike, etc., and Craig Allred, Federal Highway Administration Resource Center Transportation Specialist. Please visit www.walkinginfo.org/webinars to register for this webinar and future ones in the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan series. The 7-part series was developed by the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center and National Clearinghouse of Pedestrian and Bicycle-related safety information and resources. We offer information and technical assistance to diverse audiences about health and safety, engineering, advocacy, education, enforcement, access, and mobility as it relates to pedestrians and bicyclists. The PBIC in today's webinar are both made possible with funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration. Today's session will be archived and available for download on our website at www.walkinginfo.org/webinars. In addition to these webinars, PBIC offers 4 different in-person training courses to provide technical assistance to professionals and community members in developing pedestrian safety action plans and improving conditions for walkers. These courses can be found at walkinginfo.org/training. Now I'm going to turn the screen over to Nancy for the feature presentation, Pedestrian Safety Education. While she's getting set up with her slide presentation, I want to take a quick poll from the audience. All right, and if everyone could just let us know how many participants are viewing the webinar at your site. And we're going to give everyone a few more seconds to cast their vote. All righty, great, thank you. I'd like to welcome and thank Nancy for her presentation today. We'll take questions at the end. Nancy, please take it from here.
And I always like a little confirmation from the host, so from Davian. Can you see my title slide, Davian?
Yes, I think we're good to go.
Okay, wonderful. So good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really glad to be here, and thank you also for being here. As Davian said, my name is Nancy Pullen-Seufert. I am a research associate with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, and I'm also the associate director for the National Center for Safe Routes to School, which is the Federal Highway Administration's clearinghouse for the Federal Safe Routes to School program. And I'm really glad to be able to talk with you about education and pedestrian safety education. This is a topic that is near and dear to me. This morning when I was reflecting and sort of thinking about getting the chance to talk about education today, I thought about the fact that I have an undergraduate degree in health education and have been interested in trying to support and encourage healthy behaviors through education for a long time, and then I moved on to get a master's degree in public health. And really early on when I was working on my undergraduate degree, of course, I thought health education meant creating a brochure, and if we just created the best brochure possible, boy golly, that was going to change people's behavior. And I've learned a lot since then, so I'm glad to be able to talk about education as a really diverse topic that requires action on the part of those who are trying to encourage certain behavior and on the part of the learners as well. I've spent the last 12 years working in transportation-related injury prevention in a variety of settings, in a public health department at the county level. I've also worked in the hospital setting through trauma. And now, of course, in more of a research setting and translating research into practice. So let me tell you a little bit about what the goals are for today for you. And there are two, and they are big ones. One is getting a better understanding about what it is that people need to know. So pedestrian education needs, but also other audiences. Who are all the audiences who might benefit from some education related to keeping pedestrians safe? And then how do we go about doing those things? So what are all of the tools in our toolbox that we can use? And you'll see that the way we progress today is by going audience by audience and talking about what the key messages are, what strategies can be used, and that I've got a lot of examples too, because I want to show you what these things look like on the ground. And the second big big goal for today is learning how to integrate some of these ideas into your pedestrian safety action plan. And that part really is brief, and really the legwork is required on your end because you know your community best and have already done some initial needs assessment, have an understanding about who the right audiences are and what strategies might be best applied in your setting. So my job today is to give you a whirlwind tour of kind of the breadth of things available to you. So like I said, we're going to be talking about target audiences and key messages, and not only some examples of what the specific message should be, but then how do you get that message out in a way that really can help change behavior, right? You know, there's no use spending time in doing something called education if we don't create a setting where the learners have a chance to do the things that we want them to do. And really, you know, when I think about pedestrian safety and about the highway safety world, I feel like I've encountered people who sit sort of all along the spectrum about this. And at its extremes, you probably have met people like this who say, education is worthless. It's so hard to change people's behavior, and most of what we do for education doesn't work anyway, and instead we got to just build stuff so people will behave the way we want them to. And then on the other end, we see people that sort of say, well, gee, people are getting injured and killed on our roads. Let's just educate them. That'll fix it. If people just knew more, that would solve the problem. And we just need to raise awareness. Well, we know that that's not really it either. So, you know, as you can probably imagine, I'd argue that neither of these extremes is a fair assessment of the power of pedestrian safety education. So you know, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when we talk about education, the definition really should be broad. You know, it includes not just passive brochures and flyers. It includes engagement and opportunity for learners or for your audience to practice the desired behaviors that you want to encourage. And it really should work with enforcement and engineering efforts. And combining those strategies is really a powerful way to reduce injuries for pedestrians. So let's look at a couple of examples of those, really. And my job right now is to try to sell you on the idea that education really can make a difference. And the Walk Safe Miami program is a really nice example of that. Now, it was a multifaceted approach to try to reduce pedestrian injuries. And pediatric injuries or child pedestrian injuries were just one segment that this very wide-ranging campaign was looking to target, and they used a combination of education and enforcement measures. But they really were able to see a reduction in pedestrian crashes, and one piece that was attributable to that change was child pedestrian safety education that was taught in the school setting. And evaluators went out and actually observed child crossing behavior after having received the education in the classroom. You know, there aren't that many evaluations out there where we get to look specifically at behavior after education occurs and be able to quantify the fact that we do see a change. And that's indeed what happened with Walk Safe Miami with the child pedestrian safety education component. Another example is a pedestrian safety workshop that some folks that I worked with here at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center developed for NHTSA. And it's intended to bring together a wide variety of stakeholders at the community level who are interested in making their communities more walkable for older adults. And of course, pedestrian safety is a big piece of that. And we have done some preliminary evaluation looking at what happens with participants who go to one of these 3-hour workshops. And we just did a very simple pre-post test of older pedestrian participants and looking at changes in knowledge. And indeed, we did see a change in their knowledge before and after the workshop. For the professional participants, we wanted to know if they felt more empowered and were able to articulate a higher likelihood of taking action in their communities to help improve walking conditions for older pedestrians. And again, as you can see here, we saw an increase in participants, professional participants, intention to make changes in their community. And so again, this is another nice example of how education can really make a difference in what happens subsequently. So what are some of the key pieces for success when we think about putting together education as part of a pedestrian safety action plan? Certainly, as I've already mentioned, coordinating it with other E's like engineering and enforcement. Also combining short and long-term efforts. It won't surprise you that, you know, a one-shot educational effort that exposes someone, you know, once in an afternoon to a message is not likely to get you the long-term behavior that you want to see. But that, combined with longer-term reinforcement, really can make a change. And also being able to provide some opportunity to practice the behavior when possible. I'm going to talk more about some examples of that later on. And then also thinking about supplementing informational programs that are combined carefully with opportunities to sort of put things into practice. So, you know, PSAs, brochures, flyers, along with an active education component. And really, I know probably everybody on the line today is familiar with a walk audit. And a walk audit, I think, is a great example of an active education strategy. So what are the kinds of problems that education can help address? There are a wide variety of knowledge gaps and unsafe behaviors on the part of pedestrians, drivers, and others that we would like to try to address through education, and that really can be changed through education. Whether it is not knowing how to operate a pedestrian signal, how to activate it, or what a flashing hand means when crossing. If it has to do with children who don't have the skills in terms of understanding traffic and how to cross. It can also have to do with driver behavior and whether or not they understand the importance of watching for pedestrians, as well as what the laws are around yielding to pedestrians in their state. And also designers and engineers who aren't familiar with and don't know the benefits of using some pedestrian-friendly designs. And I have an example of that. We teach something called the Safe Routes to School National Course. And this course is intended, again, just like our pedestrian safety workshop, to bring together a wide variety of stakeholders to talk about how to make their schools more walkable and bikeable, how to make it safer and how to encourage more kids to do it. And when we've been out teaching these courses, then we do a really informal observational walk as part of that. So participants go out and get to see the surroundings near the school and sort of talk about what routes to school look like. And several times as part of those courses, then the town engineer or public works official is participating in the course, and when they're outside doing the walk, they see something that is a quick fix, and they say, oh, well, no problem. They get on their cell phones and call, and a change can happen very quickly. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about building infrastructure here, but I'm talking about some changes if they have to do with signal timing or signage or sidewalks not being clear or minor maintenance issues that need to be taken care of, things like that. But that it really was this experience of them going out on the walk audit that made them say, oh, okay, got it, we can fix this, we can address it. And I've also heard transportation directors for school districts have that same sort of experience where, you know, they really think about the school bus as being the way to get kids to school, and once they understand more about, really, it's about a variety of modes, then they really take on the idea of thinking about, gosh, how do we get kids who are walking and bicycling to school safely there as well. So when we think about planning for education, then we really want to make it be specific and something that can be measured, ideally, and that it should really address an identified problem. So you'll see this image on the right-hand side that that has a sign that talks about sort of how to use the pedestrian signal, and this is a nice example. So you know, if you have an intersection safety study that reveals that only a small percentage of pedestrians are actually activating the push button, and we assume that the button is properly designed and located and works correctly, then an education campaign can be developed to focus on increasing pedestrians' understanding of the existence of the button and the benefits of pushing it. So the other piece that's important here when we think about the sign has to do with the fact that this is education that's provided at the right time, right? This isn't a flyer that they read that comes to their house. They are standing at the crosswalk, at the intersection, want to be able to cross, and here have information to read about how to do it better. And, you know, as a side note, I mentioned how there was, you know, a potential safety study that occurred that showed you these results, that a small percentage of pedestrians were activating the push button. Well, the other benefit of that is that you then have some baseline information. You can go back and measure again after your educational efforts and find out if any change has occurred, if you see an increase in the number of pedestrians that are pushing the button. Okay, pretty obvious, but it provides a nice simple way to start thinking about these things and how they might apply for you. So who are the audiences that we think about when we think about pedestrian safety education? Well, you'll see right here that there's a long list, right? And I think one of the classic mistakes that sometimes we fall into is thinking that pedestrians, that it's all about them. And golly, if we were able to teach them how to be safe in traffic, that's going to fix our problem. And while it's partly true, right, we do want to be sure that people know how to protect themselves and how they can best keep themselves safe. That's only part of the story, right? There are a variety of other road users that need to know about this stuff. There are a variety of other folks who are decision makers, who influence roadway design and enforcement components, who need some education as well to become really important partners for you. So let's talk about just a little bit more about developing educational messages. And I mentioned a minute ago that they need to be specific in nature. And you know, slogans like "Be alert" or "Be safe" are helpful in a broad way, but they don't help people understand what the specific action is that they need to take. And that's really the piece that people need, and that we need to sort of challenge ourselves to come up with. Once we've identified what the problem is, what is the specific call to action? So, you know, as this slide says, being descriptive. So tell people what it is you want them to do. Look for cars at driveways. So I have to tell you a little story. We tried something new with International Walk to School Day, which is an annual event that communities around the country, thousands of communities, participate in. And it's a way to give visibility to the benefits of walking to school, as well as any pedestrian safety concerns that might exist that are barriers to walking and bicycling, and try to get some interest in addressing and changing those things. Well, we decided to have a slogan contest, and we said, hey, we want you to submit to us your best safety slogan related to walking and bicycling to school, and then we will pick the finalists, and then we'll put it on our website, and users can vote on the very best one. Well, what is immediately apparent is that there are a host of important safety messages related to walking and bicycling to school, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And there's no way that you could tighten them all down into one pithy little slogan. And so we got a lot of submissions that were things just like what you see here: be alert, or be safe, or be cool, walk to school. And those are great, but there's not a lot of takeaway or actionable items for our pedestrians there. So another piece is, of course, they need to be realistic, right? So if we tell people, hey, cross at a crosswalk, but then we make the closest crosswalk be really far away, we're not likely to see that change of behavior that we want to see. So when we've identified a particular problem, obviously we have to think about whether the built environment supports the behavior that we want to see, and sometimes we have to address environmental changes to the built environment first. And a minute ago, I was mentioning sort of the best way to reach the audience, and the fact that having the information about how to use the push button for pedestrians at the intersection, having that available right next to the push button sounds like a no-brainer. But you know, it is really important to think about what are the best ways to reach the audience that you want to reach, and the best setting for doing that. And certainly another important consideration is really more about your audience. Do you have non-English speaking pedestrians that you're trying to reach, and what's going to be the best way to reach them? What about individuals who have mobility impairments, who have low vision, who have no hearing or difficulty hearing? And then what about pedestrians and families with low incomes? What are the best ways to help reach them, and through what venues? So some of the most common educational messages for drivers and pedestrians really are around behaviors that they can take or make to keep themselves safe or others on the road safe. And commuters and employers, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, it tends to be more of an encouragement message that this is an opportunity for them to get out of their private vehicles. For decision makers, we talk more about policy level changes, and for neighbors, we have other messages. And don't panic, I'm going to go into more detail about each of these. So let's talk first about children. And you're going to see that I'm going to talk more about children and about older adults than some other segments of the population, and that would be because, as probably many of you on the phone know, they're overrepresented when we think about and look at who is being injured and killed as pedestrians. And for children, there are also some other special considerations. Kids are physically smaller. They have a harder time being able to see traffic. They have a more difficult time being seen. They also don't necessarily have the physical and cognitive development yet to be able to judge the speed of traffic and to focus on the task of crossing the street. And we developed, when I say we, I mean the National Center for Safe Routes to School, developed a guide for NHTSA called Teaching Children to Walk Safely as They Grow and Develop. And NHTSA asked us to do a lit review and really be sure we included in there a consideration for what kids are physically and cognitively ready to do at different ages, because that is really so important. You know, as many of you on the phone have heard, kids under the age of 10 really aren't ready to cross alone. Now that's a generalization, but it's that's one of the few things that the literature and the research does seem to bear out. There are lots of other things within there that can range a lot in terms of a child's abilities. But I will also tell you that parents tend to overestimate their kids' skills. So some of the education when we think about kids as pedestrians has to be targeted towards parents as well. And that the key action for parents is really around spending time walking with their child so that they can get a sense of their child's readiness, their child's decision-making abilities, and also talking to their child about how they are behaving as adults and as pedestrians, and sort of articulating, okay, we're going to stop at the curb. First, we're watching for cars. We're looking left. We're looking right. We're looking left again. Oh, wait, here a car is coming. We're going to wait. You know, verbalizing that so a child gets a sense about what the steps are. So what are some of the key messages that kids need to know? And they really are around two big skills, crossing the street and then choosing where to walk. And, of course, the importance of the crossing process as described here, and the importance of being visible where you're crossing and not assuming that, that drivers can see you. And then picking the right place to walk. So how do we help kids know where the best places to walk? And, of course, sidewalks, and then facing traffic if no sidewalk is present. So when we think about strategies for teaching children, then oftentimes we hear about safety assemblies or classroom-based education, and that's not the entire spectrum. And really the spectrum that you see here, I'm trying to demonstrate for you sort of the range of options, and you could also think about them from sort of the least amount of effort to the most amount of effort. Having a school-wide assembly is a way to reach a lot of kids all at one time and doesn't take very long, but it's also the least likely to have an effect. Whereas when you include parents, when you give parents some guidance on how they can walk with their children and help educate their children, that is so much more powerful. And then when you add a skills component where when kids get a chance to practice walking and bicycling and those safety skills in a real life setting, you know, as you can imagine, that's where we really get the most bang for our buck here. So I wanted to give you a recommendation or show you about a curriculum that's available from NHTSA that is a K-5 curriculum. It includes a skills practice component as well as a classroom education component. And they worked very hard. Oh, I'm sorry, my image came up a little funny, but you can see the NHTSA logo. But they worked very hard to be sure that it was matched up with the standards of learning. If you're not familiar with what that means, those are educational standards that school districts have to be sure that each of their schools and classes are meeting. There are national level standards, and then each state has its own set of standards too. And of course, if you are asking schools to spend time teaching kids about something, you want to be sure you can explain to them how it helps them meet the standards of learning or the essential academic learning requirements, whatever they're called in your state. So, real briefly, I would say 2 key points here is that, in order for kids to cross the street and choose where they are going to walk, that it takes a certain amount of development before they're ready to do that, and that spending time walking with adults, getting practice through school-based instruction or after-school settings is really, really important stuff. So what about older kids? When we think about middle school students, obviously from a cognitive perspective, they have advanced a lot since they were in elementary school and before. They have the ability to judge traffic, and they have a whole new realm of considerations in terms of how they make decisions, right? So it used to be that whatever mom and dad said was the way to go, and now, as all of you know who have ever had middle school students living in your home, also called children, there are all kinds of other influences on how they make decisions. And so how do we tap into that really to our advantage? So preteen audiences can be challenging to reach. One strategy to use is to really put them in control. So organizing a student committee to address the problem of safety and physical inactivity, or the kinds of concerns that overlap into pedestrian safety that they also care about. Of course, another big one is concern for the environment. And when they think about that and wanting to reduce the number of trips made by car and, hey, let's get out and walk, then, of course, the next piece is how do we do that safely? So engaging students to think about how they want to develop a contest or program ideas and engage other students. And that might be some kind of a peer teaching program where middle school students can teach other middle school students about it, or teach elementary school students. That has a benefit for the middle school students who participate as well as the elementary kids. And then trying to find ways to integrate walking into their school and social culture in more subtle ways, like opportunities where teachers and school staff can walk to a local field trip when possible versus taking the bus. And certainly multimedia is powerful. So any ways that we can use music, video games, computer software, there are lots of ways to hook that in. And of course, if you spend just a few minutes on YouTube, you get all kinds of ideas for either efforts that adults have made to try to engage youth, and some of them are great, or efforts that youth have put forth to talk about the issues of pedestrian safety. So let me also tell you about an example called the Junior Ambassadors Program. And in Chicago, it's actually sort of a 2-part piece that happens at the middle school level, which is it starts with the Earn a Bike component. And this is a 16-week program that allows junior high students, as well as high school students, I want to say, to earn a bike. So it's an after-school program that for the first 8 weeks, they learn bike mechanics and 8 weeks on traffic cycling education and presentation skills. And then some of those teens then move on to be hired by the Chicago Park District to work as junior bicycling ambassadors. So they ride throughout the city to different summer camps, and they do peer teaching on bike safety education with kids. So this is a really a cool program, and it's been replicated in several places around the country, including Alexandria, Virginia. So what about educating high school and college age students? And again, you know, their needs are different. High school students are probably a segment of the population that are not as likely to walk, either because their high school is located somewhere where it's too far away for them to walk, or it's just not sited safely, or because they want to take advantage of newfound driving privileges. You know, one way to engage high school students, which is something that we talked about with middle school as well, is really hooking into clubs or other initiatives that are going on with groups that care about transportation or about health and the environment. So, you know, anytime these messages come from their peers, it's certainly more powerful. So when we think about college-age students, they are more likely to walk and bike than drive on campus, and sometimes this is due to restricted campus parking, the expense that comes along with owning a car, and also because, you know, this is a segment of the population that more than others tends to be pretty able-bodied and physically fit, willing to get out and walk and bike, and really they're an ideal target for pedestrian safety and promotion campaigns. However, they also tend to take more risks than other age groups, and you got to get past that feeling of invincibility, and probably are not likely to respond really strongly to safety outreach initiatives unless you're clever about it. And certainly we can't ignore the fact that alcohol can play a role, and we have to think about ways to sort of curl that into the messaging as well. So sort of two parts here. Part one is thinking about how do we sell high school and college students on walking and bicycling, and it can be money savings, it can be around avoiding parking hassles, and perhaps the health benefits. And you know, the messages that they need to know are the same as for other pedestrians, really of any age. This is the age that when we certainly start to be sure that we talk about cell phone use as well, and the fact that cell phone use and being a pedestrian don't mix well, particularly when crossing streets or driveways, other places where they might be stepping in front of traffic. In terms of strategies, we've kind of talked about several of these already, and I guess the one at the bottom around giving incentives, and students love free stuff, and this can be a way for you to help propagate your message too. And I want to give an example of that, and that is here on our campus at the University of North Carolina. This is a program that the Highway Safety Research Center is part of and works with the Department of Public Safety, so with the enforcement agency on the UNC campus, and it is a time every year where we try to shed a light and remind people who are walking on campus about the importance of pedestrian safety. So student volunteers pass out flyers, and they do it at the crosswalks. So again, when we think about what are the right learning environments to get the message out and reaching people when they need to hear it, that would be there. We also give out T-shirts. So people like free stuff. It also can be a way, like I was saying, to sort of sustain your message. And DPS, or Department of Public Safety, enforces safety at campus intersections and pedestrian crossings. So those pieces come together, the education piece and the enforcement piece. So what are the things that all pedestrians need to know that perhaps we haven't touched on yet? You know, one piece really has to do with visibility and being visible to drivers, and the importance of retroreflective material. You know, a lot of us grew up thinking about, oh, if I wear light colors, if I wear white, that's going to help me be seen, and really that doesn't do the job, and retroreflective is really so valuable. And of course, in low light conditions, carrying a flashlight or a headlamp or A blinky light that's used on the back of a bicycle can also be used by a pedestrian, and those can all be helpful. There are some pedestrian safety campaign materials that Federal Highway has on their website. I'm showing you some examples here, and they come in a variety of formats. They are printable, so they can be flyers, but there are also videos and PSAs available. So how do we reach adult pedestrians? And being able to incorporate our messaging into other venues, of course, is what oftentimes makes the most sense. So whether that has to do with some kind of a broader PR effort, also including safety messages in maps, on signage, as well as any place where we are giving messages about how to be safer drivers. Most drivers are also pedestrians at some point in time, and vice versa. I think another strategy that shouldn't be overlooked is for some segment of the adult population, there are also parents. And in order for them to know what to teach their children about, it is an excuse or an opportunity to say, hey parents, in case you need a little refresher, here are some of the key elements that you might want to talk about with your child. Well, you are then indirectly, obviously, bringing that parent up to speed on what's important as well. So let's talk about older pedestrians. And as I mentioned previously, this is another segment of the population that tends to be overrepresented in pedestrian crashes. And as well, they have a higher likelihood of not surviving if they are hit. And this is coupled with a variety of cognitive and physical issues that can make it more difficult for them to negotiate traffic. So a variety of things that all come together. At the same time, older pedestrians, just like other adults, need to be able to get around their community, both for the physical activity benefit as well as the utilitarian benefit, being able to run errands around town. So I want to tell you briefly about how we developed messages specifically for older pedestrians within the pedestrian safety workshop that I told you about at the top of the hour. I always wanted to use that phrase, the top of the hour. So thank you for bearing with me. That was my big chance. Okay, so watching out for us. This is one module within the broader pedestrian safety workshop, and this piece is specifically targeted to older pedestrians. And as I told you, the pedestrian safety workshop in its entirety, the 3-hour version, is really intended for a wide stakeholder audience. This 30-minute piece is all about what older pedestrians can do to help keep themselves safe. And we were trying to craft this in a way that was very respectful of older pedestrians. Obviously, they've been walking for many, many years and negotiating traffic. They know a lot. And so what we really try to focus on is saying to them, hey, let's talk about what are the highest risk situations where pedestrians are most likely to get hit, and then what is it that you can do to help control that situation. And the situations, and this is based on data about where older pedestrians tend to be hit. It's at intersections, it's from backing vehicles, it's from an overarching problem of drivers saying, oh, boy, I just didn't even see them. And then this fourth piece that we try to get across, which is about having too much trust in the system. And so this is the whole idea that if you're standing at an intersection and you see the walk sign go on and you just assume that drivers are going to stop, or you assume that drivers see you and you step out in front. So we talk about this concept of not having too much trust in the system and always taking that sort of extra precaution. So let's talk more broadly now about some of the real important pieces for older pedestrians. And one of the recommendations, depending on how mobile they are, because again, the functionality and fitness for older pedestrians can range widely. For those who are moving more slowly, then picking a route with fewer crossings or picking crossings that are shorter in distance can be really helpful. And obviously watching for turning cars. And another piece is letting older pedestrians know who they can call in their city or town if signal timing isn't what it should be. If there is a place where there are a lot of older pedestrians crossing and there's not enough time for them to cross the street, then this is something that Public Works should know about. So, strategies for working with this population. How do you reach them? Well, it's just like working with high school students and saying we're going to engage other high school students as part of our strategy. Well, here it's engaging other groups that already have existing strong coalitions and networks who care about older adults' health and well-being and helping them age in place. So the organizations listed here all tend to be those. There are certainly many, many others. And also thinking about what setting the education might occur in, or how do you reach a lot of older pedestrians. So by thinking about where they tend to go, where they are. And, senior centers isn't on this list, but it should be. Another one that some of our workshop instructors have told us about is congregate meal sites as being a good place as well, particularly if it's someplace that people can walk to. Also walking clubs, older adult walking clubs, such as in California, Oakland, and Alameda counties have really active walking clubs that also obviously really care about pedestrian safety for older adults. I want to tell you a little bit, just very briefly, about the WalkWise program, which was in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and it was a multifaceted effort. It engaged older pedestrians, law enforcement, planners, a variety of folks to say, what is it we would like to see in our community, what would help us move around in our community better, and then how do we make that happen? And they did educational workshops and walking audits. They actually developed some, they didn't call them recommended walking routes, but basically some signed walking routes. This worked really well because Hendersonville is a place that draws a lot of visitors. It has a very nice little walkable downtown, so it made a lot of sense to sort of recommend places where people might want to walk. And then they focused some of their engineering efforts and improvement efforts along those routes. And, as you can see here, used National Active Aging Week as an opportunity to get out the message and participate in that, and certainly worked closely with AARP along with their other local partners. Okay, if you haven't stood up lately, I suggest standing up, take a deep breath. We're going to talk about drivers and what can we do to educate drivers. And certainly we know that one of the big concerns is that drivers aren't watching for pedestrians. They're not yielding to pedestrians when they do see them. So key messages for drivers are really around those two things, as well as stopping completely and not stopping in the middle of a crosswalk. Of course, now we also have to think about speeding and distractions like cell phones and smartphones, and the fact that can be a real risk for people who are trying to walk near cars. Another piece that a lot of drivers don't think about is sometimes it's not a good idea to wave on a pedestrian, and particularly if you're in a situation where there are multiple lanes of traffic driving in the same direction, while one driver might stop for a pedestrian in a crosswalk, other lanes might not. So it's important to tell drivers not to wave pedestrians on because they don't know if other drivers are going to be stopping for them. And, certainly I think appealing to drivers about the fact that, hey, we have kids walking here and kids, expect that drivers are going to be watching for them and stopping. So how do we reach them? I included this little picture because I thought it was a nice combination of humor as well as some very direct messaging. And this is in Phoenix, Arizona, and this is a fence outside of an elementary school. So what other strategies can we use? Certainly plugging into local media, so a driver safety awareness campaign on TV or radio, hosting a commute time radio talk series on pedestrian safety issues, developing an ad campaign. You know, we talked about this already, but I think it bears repeating that anytime or a location where there's driver education material going out, that's an opportunity to get out messaging around pedestrian safety as well. And of course, engineering treatments are vitally important, you know, in terms of being used with education messages, whether it's alerting to drivers to watch out for pedestrians or spreading messages about the importance of yielding to them. And I know that there are other webinars in this series that talk at length about some of those things. But here are some examples of some of the visual public education campaigns that are out there. Let's talk a little bit about alcohol use. In case you didn't know, alcohol is a factor in 1/3 of pedestrian deaths, and certainly influences how people choose to behave, and requires a multifaceted approach when we think about addressing it. So education is one piece of that, but there really are a variety of levers that could be combined with a public awareness campaign to create a more comprehensive approach. It can be around developing local or state laws that control the availability of alcohol, you know, such as a law that dictates when bars must close. It can be around developing or amending laws to allow police to detain pedestrians if they're out walking impaired and may harm themselves or others. And again, there certainly are different levels and different policy approaches that can be used to sort of address that particular concern. Working with health officials and employment centers, other related groups for early identification and treatment of people with alcohol problems. And then addressing the environmental issues, obviously, improved lighting, speed control measures through commercially zoned places, and trying to use some other kinds of interventions on high-speed roads, particularly in rural areas, and medium-speed roads in urban areas where there has been a pattern of drunk pedestrians being hit by drivers. So certainly drivers themselves need to know that they should not drive impaired, and also to watch out for pedestrians. And there might be particular areas, you know, as we talked about a minute ago, where there tend to be hotspots for impaired pedestrians. So messages related to alcohol for pedestrians. The key piece here is really making sure pedestrians understand and sort of reminding them, hey, drinking does impact your cognitive and physical abilities, and certainly your decision-making abilities. In Queensland, Australia, they did a very creative public education campaign, Don't Become a Staggering Statistic, and they rolled this out during the Olympics in 2000 and used a combination of efforts, PSAs, news releases, T-shirts worn by bar employees to remind drinkers about drinking and walking and what the risks can be there. So let's talk a little bit about commuters. And this is where we really touch on kind of a two-part message, right? We have workplaces that and employers that are working very hard to control traffic congestion for a variety of reasons. So they are trying to encourage their employees to drive less. So whether that's by carpooling, taking the bus, or if possible, walking or bicycling to work. So there's a two-parter, right? So one is encouraging the behavior, and then the second piece is helping people do that safely. So what kinds of messages work when we think about working with employers or workplaces to try to encourage more walking? Part of it is around the cost savings they can have, as well as sort of the, hey, avoid sitting in traffic, and avoid contributing to air quality problems, as well as the benefits of walking, the physical activity that they can then build into their day. Sometimes it's a gap in knowledge that people don't know how far they can walk in 5 minutes. And so this last bullet point here about feasibility of walking, sometimes it's as simple as creating a map that shows a 5-minute walk zone. You know, if you're looking at a hospital that employs hundreds of people, and the hospital shows a map that says, hey, if you live within, a 10-minute walk from here, here's the whole area that can be reached within a 10-minute walk. So certainly working with TDM programs that are already out there, and being able to partner with them to do both the encouragement side of things as well as building in the pedestrian safety messaging. There are 2 links that are listed on this slide, and I'll tell you this second one, VTPI, has several ideas of strategies for workplace interventions from the Victoria Transport Policy Institute. And I think if you go to the vtpi.org homepage, you could find it as well. So don't feel like you have to scribble down this lengthy URL. Portland SmartTrips is an example of a commute trip reduction campaign, and they really did see a reduction in single occupant vehicles for getting to and from work that way, and they saw an increase in other modes. What about reaching out to elected officials, decision makers, all these other folks that have such an influence on what the pedestrian environment looks like, and what can we do to help educate them? And obviously, it's key to have their buy-in about the importance of walking and the need for safe walking conditions, because they are the ones who can provide the resources or make the decisions that will help sort of address the problem. So when we think about that, who are the types of folks that we need to reach? And this list, while long, isn't even everyone, but it also, I guess I would argue, that it might give you some ideas of some partners that you haven't thought about trying to reach in the past. Your EMS and trauma system, or hospitals, certainly engineers and planners. And hopefully that one is not a surprise to you, but also transit, and how do we better engage with transit? Because if you are a bus rider, you are also more than likely a pedestrian at the beginning and end of your trip. So how do we do that, and how do we engage with these folks? There are certain things that they really need to know, and that we want to try to establish their buy-in on. And, the fact that walking is a key part of the transportation system, that having pedestrians in the community, that there's a quality of life benefit, that there's an economic benefit to that. Other important messages have to do with the fact that we often take for granted that walking. It's a very basic form of transportation, but it's easy to overlook. And, designing a safe, convenient, comfortable walking environment requires planning, careful engineering, attention to detail, ongoing maintenance and care. It's just like maintaining roads. It's not a one-shot deal. And that it's not just about making the physical improvements, and I'm talking now above and beyond just the maintenance issues, but also land use control issues, enforcement, education, complete package of measures that require coordination and support from a broad range of people, from politicians as well as some of the professionals that we've already talked about. So what are some of the strategies to really hook in decision makers? And I bet I don't even need this slide. I bet we as a group on the phone could build a much longer list. But just in case you haven't considered all of these, certainly opportunities to take decision makers out on a walk is huge, and helping them see what things look like. And if there's a way that you can build an event around that and invite media, all the better. Certainly building partnerships with other folks who either care about the exact same thing you do or are one-off from what you care about. Perhaps a group that has a broader health message, or people that really care about trying to reduce traffic, all of those pieces. Something else I want to throw out there is the PBIC, the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, Walkable Communities designation. I think that is such a great opportunity to be able to go to your community decision makers and say, hey guys, this is something that our community should have, and let's look at how we can earn a designation. Let's talk a little bit about neighbors and what are the things that people who live near places that people like to walk or should be able to walk need to know. And there are some certainly overlap, guys, with all these audiences, right? But a piece that's kind of unique for neighbors is thinking about keeping sidewalks clear, whether that has to do with snow or pruning or not keeping your trash can in the middle of a sidewalk. And in Montgomery County, Maryland, the county has started a Golden Shovel Award, which is a designation provided, I believe, to community members who do a good job of keeping their sidewalk clear. So I really like that as sort of a creative incentive. But you might want to Google that and see if you can learn more if you're interested. So what are the strategies? Again, the opportunity to get out and go for a walk and identify what the problems are is so valuable. And when we've been out teaching the older pedestrian workshop, and we've talked with other workshop instructors who have taught us about what they've learned, they've said, neighborhood associations are so important and really a powerful group, people who care about their community and want to make a change, and could be a very good way to engage neighbors as well. So, in summary, what are some of the key takeaways from today? Certainly that education can take on a variety of forms. It is not just a brochure. It is so much broader than that, and certainly needs to be coupled with other E's, so enforcement and education, for example. That there are a variety of audiences that can be reached and that very well may need education that you might want to be thinking about. That the messages vary depending on who those folks are. And certainly children have different needs and abilities than other members of the community. Same thing for older pedestrians. And that we want to target the messaging and think about who we need to target it to. And what else? I also just wanted to be sure that I've mentioned this pedestrian safety workshop a couple times, and I realized I didn't give you any information about where to find it. You can actually go online and just watch the entire workshop if you want, but it really is intended to be a live workshop, so you can download all the materials and work with other folks to go out and teach it in your community or communities. And we also, I mentioned there's a standalone piece within the workshop that is just about older pedestrian safety and what older pedestrians can do to help keep themselves safe. That is downloadable and available from this site as well. So, very briefly, what about incorporating education into your broader pedestrian safety action plan? So, how does it fit? And it fits on more than one level. People who are developing pedestrian safety action plans are not going to be going out and doing all of the education. Certainly, developing partnerships and communicating and coordinating efforts is going to be really important. This gives you an idea about some of the potential partners that you might work with to establish what the education goals and objectives should be, and and certainly can also be your partners on implementing and evaluating educational efforts that you make. So at the state level, Governor's Highway Safety, as well as Traffic Safety Commission, just depends what state you're in. At the community level, it's a very broad audience, and I bet just based on our conversation today, you could list other potential partners, as well as consultants. Sometimes consultants are engaged to formulate and or implement public safety campaigns as well. So in review, our learning objectives at the start of today were, and so this is what I hope you feel like you can now do, is be able to articulate what are some of the messages that we need to get out that relate to pedestrian safety, who needs to know those messages, what are some strategies for doing them, what's the importance of having a specific message, what's the importance of the placement of the message, and hopefully you are leaving with a lot of ideas for how this might potentially integrate into your pedestrian safety action plan. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Davian for any questions that, that folks in the audience have put forth.
Thank you, Nancy. Now we have some time for questions. Please enter your questions into the box on your screen. Again, if we run out of time for your question, we'll attempt to answer it and get back to you after the program. Alrighty, we're going to move into our first question. Are you aware of any analysis of how states' driver testing incorporates pedestrian awareness?
Oh, that is a great question, and I have to say I don't know, and I'm trying to think. I'm sure that somebody, probably someone on this call right now, knows the answer to that. But I'm sorry, I don't have any specific examples, and I don't know if there might be any on the PBIC website.
We can definitely follow up after the program and get that question posted to the website along with a response.
Great, thank you.
All righty, the next question. Have any before and after studies been conducted for the Street Smarts program from San Jose?
That's a good question too, and I don't know the answer to that. I know that I've been able to find information about Street Smarts by going online and just doing a Google search. So it could be that it could be found that way. But again, Davian, that's something that we could post an answer to as well.
Absolutely. All right, we'll move into the next question. What about connections between the public streets and getting into private developments, such as shopping centers? Suddenly the pedestrian path disappears and pedestrians have to maneuver through parking lots and cross at areas where drivers are not looking for pedestrians, but looking for parking places and other cars.
Okay, so Davian, can you tell me what the question?
Absolutely. It looks like the question is, and this may be, it sounds like a more of an engineering question, but it says, what about connections between the public streets and getting into private development, right. Such as shopping centers? Yeah,
and you're right. Yeah. Anyone who has moved around in their community likely has seen these real gaps, real disconnects in terms of getting pedestrians all the way to their destination. Yeah, and probably I think about that as being engineering countermeasures, but also so much having to do with planning and what local policies are about requiring residential housing developments, whether or not they require developers to put in sidewalks or not as well. I know for some communities that's a lever that they use.
All righty, we'll move into the next question. What is the model of an education plan for people with disabilities of any age and ethnicity? 1/4 of our society now has a disability.
So in terms of, and I'm assuming we're thinking about people with disabilities in terms of thinking about them as pedestrians. I'm going to assume that that's what this person is asking about. And I think that there are a variety of ways to do that. There are actually some good resources online that are specifically, now this is only one piece of it, right, but that are specifically about some extra guidance for people with low vision, for example, about how to negotiate intersections and how to use pedestrian facilities. And same thing for considerations, I think, for people who are deaf. So one piece is the individual level education message. What does that need to be? But certainly, anytime we're trying to be sure that we are accommodating all pedestrians, then we need to be thinking about educating at the community level, at the organizational level, certainly not just at the individual level. So I think reminding and educating local public works officials about ADA requirements and what can be done there is so important. I also know that when we've been out teaching the older pedestrian workshops, with one of our pilot tests, we included some extra assistive devices for people to use in case they wanted to get a sense about what it was like to try to negotiate their city's streets and routes if they were in a walker or a scooter. And so I think that experiential aspect for decision makers can be a really powerful tool as well. And certainly having, and I'm thinking mostly here about mobility issues when I'm answering this part of the question, but also thinking about people with mobility kinds of impairments participating in workshops so that they can speak up and say, well, here's where I have a problem, or hey, that works for everyone else, but for people who are in scooters, here's what some of the issues are. And I've seen that work very, very well.
Thank you, Nancy. Again, if you have a question, please enter the question into the question box, and we will get that answer for you. We'll go ahead and move into the next question. Are there any suggestions for integrating ped safety education into an MTO long-range plan?
Boy, other than recommendations that are made broadly about developing a pedestrian safety action plan, I don't have anything more to tell you, and really it's just not something that I'm terribly familiar with, so I apologize.
All right, let's see. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to try to sum this question up. It looks like it's a pretty lengthy question, but it says, my biggest education problem is getting local municipal agencies, in particular the fire department and public works department, to understand the necessity of addressing pedestrians and bicyclists. What is the best way of approaching these agencies?
And it was the importance of what, Davian?
It looks like to understand the necessity of addressing pedestrians and bicyclists, and especially in getting agreement on the use of innovative methods of improving safety commons. So they're looking for ways to approach municipal agencies with this issue.
Well, I could be way off base here, but when I think about where there tends to be some disconnect between EMS and public works and pedestrians, then I think about things like speed bumps and concerns about EMS access to roads. And my understanding is, and again, this is sort of outside of my area of expertise, is that that there are different policies about what level of service streets can have what kinds of countermeasures on them. So I guess the piece that I would like to address would be more of the relationship building aspect. And we really have had good luck with convening stakeholders using some kind of a workshop model where people have an opportunity to say, okay, here's where I'm coming from, or sort of, here's what my issues are, and then being able to go out and physically look at an area and talk about, well, as a pedestrian, here's what we encounter, and what is the common ground we can reach that's going to best meet everybody's needs. But I really think, you know, bringing together stakeholders and giving them sort of that experiential piece of going out and walking has really been helpful in what we've seen.
Okay. The next question. Do you find that low-income students receive education messages differently than higher-income students, or is the issue just the fact that the message needs to be delivered to low-income students?
Nothing comes to mind to me that is about a differential in how messages need to be given, other than considerations for certainly reaching communities with low income, since we know that they tend to have a disproportionate number of pedestrian injuries and certainly child pedestrian injuries. And I guess thinking about sort of the broader context in which those messages are given, yeah, and speaking in generalities here, but you know, one of the big issues can be that in communities with low income, oftentimes parents are working 2 jobs. They don't necessarily have the ability to walk to school with their child, so that might not be a message that would really be a good fit. But in terms of, you know, the basics about how do you cross the street safely, that doesn't vary with income level.
Do you have any suggestions of how to sell pedestrian safety education to teachers when they are concerned about other issues in their classroom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one idea is to not do a classroom-based, to do it through PE. Another idea is to integrate it and show how it fits into meeting the essential academic learning requirements that teachers need to meet. And that NHTSA Pedestrian Safety Curriculum that I mentioned does that. It specifically states which standards of learning it helps meet. I will also tell you that if there is a person or people who can go in and do the instruction so that the teacher doesn't have to learn the lesson plans and doesn't have to do the direct teaching, that is a big way to sell it as well.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like we have one last question. How do you encourage elected officials to participate? And also, do you, Nancy, know offhand the link to developing a walking survey?
Okay, so the first part about getting elected officials involved, that around, I guess you didn't get any more details on it than that, did you, Davey?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Certainly, boy, I just listened to a really great speaker. She was a city councilwoman from Greenville, South Carolina, and she was on fire about making her community more walkable. And she said what the city had done was a survey of its citizens and said to residents, what are your priorities? What do you think your community should be focused on? And what should your town be focused on? And then she used those findings to turn around and say, okay, these are our priorities, people. And that includes a priority for making our community more walkable. So point being, anytime you can help that elected official either articulate to their constituents how they are better serving their constituents by their concern for pedestrian safety, or the other angle to take is to learn all you can about what that elected official's priorities are and then figure out how pedestrian safety ties into them. You know, do they care about economic development in their downtown? Do they care about childhood obesity? Do they care about traffic congestion? And, you know, work from the point that they care about. That's going to be really your common ground. And then from a more concrete perspective in terms of answering this question, then I would say, you know, being able to invite an elected official to an event where they get to have their picture taken or be interviewed in the paper is really helpful. So whether that's holding a workshop or a walk to school day or getting to do a ribbon cutting on a new sidewalk, all of those things are great ways to get elected officials in the room. Okay, Davian, that was part one of the question. Can you repeat part two for me?
Yeah, it was, do you know of a link for how to develop a walking survey?
Okay, and when we're talking about walking survey, I'm not sure if this person means like, how do I do a walk audit, and do you have any instruments for a walk audit, or if the person might mean, hey, are there any online surveys that I can use that I can send people to?
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any. If we could get that question clarified, we can definitely try to get that answered for you after the program.
Well,
a walking audit. It looks like it was a walking audit.
Okay. I think that walkinginfo.org, the PBIC's page, has several walk audits available, examples of what they look like. And quite honestly, I'll tell you that the one that is probably most widely used, particularly for a community lay audience, so not engineers that are out wanting to measure widths and understand real technical stuff, is the walkability checklist. And that's available on the Walking Info website. And the questions are very straightforward, and yet I will tell you that that walkability checklist has stood the test of time. Over and over again, it has worked really well as being a starting point for conversations for communities. It's been, I've talked to communities who have used it as a way to collect, aggregate information and say, look, here's what people in the community care about or see as concerns and barriers to walking. And I've also seen it as an activity, and it's an excuse to bring people together and say, okay, let's go out and find out more and then talk about what it is that we see. And it's a very straightforward questionnaire. What did you like? What didn't you like? Anyway, you can find a copy on the PBI on walkinginfo.org.
All right, and Nancy, I've just sent out a link to the audience to the walkability checklist on the PBIC site, as well as a link to walking audits on the PBIC site.
You are on top of it, Davian. Thank you.
All right, it looks like that's about all the time we have. We did have some engineering and treatment-related questions. We'll try to see if we can get someone to follow up and get those questions answered. I also would recommend taking a look at the Designing for Pedestrian Safety series that's also archived on the PBIC site at www.walkinginfo.org/webinars, and that entire series has been archived there. Once again, a recording and transcript of today's program, as well as a PDF view copy of the slide presentation, will be available in about a week at walkinginfo.org/webinars. I do want to remind you that a video survey will appear once the webinar has ended. Again, we very much appreciate you taking a moment to complete it. Thank you again to our speaker, Nancy Pullen-Seufert, and thanks to all of you for attending today's PBIC and Federal Highway Administration Designing for Pedestrian Safety Action Plan webinar series. Thank you and have a great day.